Hello, selectors, and welcome to the Life Burst Podcast. Today, Tiffany can't join me. She's out on the town, but I have a pretty cool special guest with me. I've got Kevin with me. Say hi, Kevin.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
So, Kevin, you and we first met in what, the second ceremony?
I think it was the second ceremony, if I remember right.
Yeah, we got paired up, and then Carta Magica was like, "Nope." And that was it. I remember the first thing, like I said to you when you were shuffling up, was like you had the light in such a way on your matte sleeves that they were like, I was like, are those frosted sleeves?
It looks like they were almost like holographic or something, just because the ring lights I had on my desk here.
Yeah. But we've been reunited in the selector circuit sphere of the world. You got third place for it, right?
Yes, correct.
And so you picked me to be your partner for this.
Yep.
So we've been doing a ton of testing, getting ready for, there's gonna be some content coming out of our like matches and things going out as we play against other content creators. We can't tell you exactly what deck we settled on. We did have like a really, like, it was right up to the limit too. We knew our deck list had to be submitted like at 12 latest, or at 11:59, and we got in there at 11:50 with our deck list submission.
Yeah, last minute decisions. It was very tough call between different decks.
Yeah, we basically settled into three different decks, which will go unnamed for now. But it's a weird format. It's a weird format that we're playing against basically only DXM on your, like, the non-content creators are only playing DXM, and the content creators are only playing DXM, and have to sort of expect a wild variety of field, but no Machina, no Deus shenanigans. So it's definitely a different meta than what the actual WeCross meta is what we've discovered. But that actually brings us to today's topic, man, which we're going to talk about in a bit. We're going to be talking about the speed of the format. I think it's a pretty good one to talk about the pace of what kind of decks are successful currently in the meta.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, just the current pace of the game really sort of defines what sort of decks you can bring into it. So it's a really good place to start when you're like setting up your deck building, or looking into what you want to play in any set coming out. So
Yeah, it's true. It's like, and this the really the passion of behind this topic really started coming out for me when I was working on Strike Theory, which I'll plug the video. You guys should watch the Strike Theory video on the channel if you haven't. It is pretty pertinent to this conversation. But I don't think it's a hard thing to know that my love of Nova is quite high, right? Like, that was that was the ceremony we met. I was playing the Nova deck, and you were actually, I was terrified, like, when you opened, because we got a little bit of gameplay in before they were like, actually, this round's not real. We have to soften it up. And you showed that you were Ray, and I was like, oh god, this might be a loss.
yeah, that was the matchup I was expecting going into that ceremony. And after doing a bunch of play testing with Ray, I was like, okay, this actually feels pretty good. Put consistent pressure on the late game. I can't really get walled out as hard, and I was pretty hopeful going into that. My raid matchup ended up being pretty solid through that ceremony. My Nova matchup.
It was fantastic. So it worked in my favor, because then I got paired up against someone who was playing card jockey, and I won. I was like, all right, cool. This is a good reshuffle. But I think that ceremony, you ended up right behind me, right at number 6.
Yep. I think we both ended up winning our last round because of that. So we both walked into, I think, top 8 or top 8, something like that. Yeah.
So it was good for both of us, the reshuffle. But like, I love Nova, right? And I did, the Strike Theory, and I was like, how do I achieve like victory with Nova? What is my game attacks? Like, what is my game plan here? And realistically, it's like, all right, you get in that first Signy attack, and then you wait 2 turns, You get in another attack on turn 3 with her ability, right? And
Hmm.
then after that, your goal is to basically just Komai every turn, if possible, or something, some whatever equivalent to Komai. But your goal is to hit 2 damage every turn. But that basically puts you on track for a turn 8 win, and that's impossible. Like nowadays in Wixoss, it's just impossible. You can't do that.
Yeah, there's just too many tools to bypass the defenses you could set up in Nova originally. The game has changed a lot within just the couple sets since then.
Yeah, and honestly, if you want to boil it down to one specific thing that has changed the game dramatically, it's easy access to assassin.
Very much so. I'd agree.
Like, not only does X give you assassin, which is, fantastic on its own front, Kentucky does it. And Kentucky does it like and the decks that want to play Kentucky um don't even care if their souls are not on the field. Like, yes, X and Deus definitely will do some soul shenanigans and do some enter burn, but there are decks out there that are going to play black and red and just want 2 damage assassin, or two enter assassin.
The fact that you can slap down a card on the field and, pay a red and a black enter and just have assassin whenever you want is, it's a threat you have to constantly be aware of.
Yeah, I mean exactly. Like, there was a time with what Nova could do was it basically just disrupted everyone's game plan, right? It was like, you all want to attack, and the only good way to attack me right now is with red removal or black removal, which only can do stuff on a certain value threshold, usually 8,000 and below, 5,000 and below, sometimes 12,000 and below. And if you were above that number, that threshold, you were basically immune to removal, right? Green sadly wasn't a thing, and green still sadly isn't a thing, right? Like, one of the things that I was terrified when I was playing Nova was that some random Osagetsune deck was going to exist, and I was just going to be like, I don't have walls.
Right, very much so. And I mean, outside of that, it's like, you've got some expensive removal on rose quartz and things like that. I mean, it's costed well, but when you're playing a rose quartz and like a no limit deck, you've only got so much enter to go around because you're really trying to push damage and blowing enter super, super fast. So by
Yeah.
the time Nova walled up in the end game, it could get really difficult to consistently push over and get some damage in.
No, it's not. It's so the it's Assassin has really done a good job of eliminating like these Nova decks, right? That want to wall up and go to turn 8. But there's other things too, right? Like, green has always had the tools to beat that because it's got the 10,000 and up kind of dealio. But the white now has White Heaven, which is obscenely, like, White Heaven is just one of the best pieces you could be playing. Period. And
White
blue,
Heaven's just super, super value.
right, and like to the point where you can play 2 White Heavens, right? Because you can now dream teams are more of a thing, and you can play Ange.
Yep. Just super effective cost removal, denies the enter for the opponent the entire time you play both of them. Just great resource management and just super cost efficient.
Yeah, and then so that's one thing, but then also blue now has a plethora of ways to deal with stuff too. Madoka's once a game, Madoka 2.0 once a game where it can bottom stuff. If you wanted to be playing Tamago, you could be playing Tamago beating and bottom things. There's also Great Hamlin Trap is going to come out next set. And there's another one I'm brain farting on. It's the piece. Summer Lives Blues.
Yep, you got it.
Yeah. So like every color currently has tools to deal with like walls now. So it's just not a thing you can do. And so if you can't wall up, the question is, and I think I probably know the answer already, but I'll pose it to you, Kevin. The question is, can you get to turn 8 feasibly in WeCross anymore?
Honestly, outside of some really extenuating circumstances, I don't really think so. Not in the
Yeah.
current state of the game with, the limited amount of assists and pieces we have and things like that. If you can't really wall up on the board right now and you've only got so many tools to go with, you can't make it that far.
No, it's true. Like, Exia is the only way I can think of, but you need to be in a weird scenario where you are like, for testing purposes too, for like future ceremony, as I was thinking about. I was like, I'm gonna bring back Nova. I'm gonna figure out a way to crack this, right? And I took Nova and I paired it with Black, and the idea was I will never not have an Exia on the field past turn 3. That was my plan, and I successfully did it, and then successfully died every game. Because like Exia is a great card and it's very defensive, but there is a major problem, which is it's only 4 cards in your deck, and you're not going to reliably have it every game. And even if you did have it every game, it does nothing to help you win the game. And this format is just based on winning the game by attacking.
I think by
Um,
nature, it is a very aggressive, format. It's an aggressive game. I think
so
with how things
yeah,
currently are, you can't really just wall up.
no, no, I don't think so. Like, I mean, and it's not like walling doesn't have a feature in it, right? Like one of the most annoying cards that you can play against right now is Baphomet, which is just a turn 1 7,000 if the opponent's able to go turn 1 Baphomet, generally speaking. Which I was at my locals the other day, literally yesterday, and I got first place playing with a Deus aggro deck that I was testing a weird package out with, and it was super wacky because I had too much red in the deck that I was playing with Deus, and I didn't manage to be able to go to like to grow to level 3 like twice with my Deus and still managed to place, which is saying something about Deus aggro. It's like still like where it can be like, yeah, it's fine. I can be level 2 for an extra turn. Um, but what ended up happening was there was 2 games out of my 4 rounds that I was able to play Baphomet, and my opponent was looking at it with its like they had Rommel in one case, in the other case they had a Lancelot, and it still did the job, right? It protected my life cloth by 1 damage. And so it's not to say that there isn't like walling doesn't necessarily have a place in Wecross. It's just I think right like I was only putting a very temporary 1 turn defense up with the Baphomet. The idea was I can deprive my opponent with one damage for that turn. Um, but I'm still using a ton of removal, right? I had the Machina assist, so I will still be able to attack through. And so it did nothing to stop my offense, but it shored up a little bit of my defense, but it was a very temporary move. So I think there's some benefit to having some walls, but not necessarily for wall's sake. If you
It
if
seems
you
like
know
it's
what I'm
more of like
saying.
a side strat or just something like, you can't just wall because that won't push damage for the game. You need to be able to put things on the board that are still going to allow you to put damage out or have a strategy in your deck that's still allowing you to push damage. And the walls are just a way to sort of like, like you said, stall for just a turn while you are closing the game out or early on to save you a life cloth, just 1 or 2, but allow you to keep pushing your game plan forward without taking a ton of fast damage.
Yeah, I think we would say we wouldn't necessarily call it walling. We probably would call it like board positioning, right? Or something like
Yeah, I
that.
think
Just
that's probably a
positioning.
better term for it because you're right. It's really not walling out at that point. It's just a, a a good position to have on the board that just sort of either preserves a bit of your life or preserves just a bit of your board state for one more turn.
When we were doing our testing, we were doing a lot of talking about like, all right, what turn is the format, right? What do you have to win by, or you lose in Wecross? And Kevin, what turns do you think exist in Wecross?
So I do think early on in Wecross, No Limit was kind of king. It was pushing damage incredibly fast, and it seemed like a turn 3 format was a very real possibility. But things have sort of slowed down a little bit since then. Not a ton, but they have. But it really feels like the key turns at this point are like turn 4, turn 5, and that's really about all you're going to see at this point in this format.
And I think we can take it a step further. The turn 4 is the default number, right? And you have to do something to make it turn 5.
I'd agree. Turn 4 really feels like the be all end all turn, and you need to have some sort of good board positioning, or some really solid life burst. Get kind of lucky there on the end, towards the end of the game, to really move into that extra turn.
Yeah, and if we were trying to get to the extra turn, there's really two L rigs, right? That two assist L rigs that make it possible to get to that turn 5, and that's disrespect, like MC line disrespect and Madoka clap, right?
Definitely. And there's a reason that those are the first two assist L rigs a lot of people are taking into consideration when they start looking at dream team decks, or what teams they want to play, or anything like that. They are very real considerations that they can push the game to that point, like you said.
Yeah, and like other decks just we tested a lot of against X and Deus, right? Because those are what we're going to play against in this selector circuit, and it gave us the chance to play with a ton of Deus Shield and Machina binds, and like there was just you engineered scenarios where I had 2 enter and I couldn't shield, or I had 4 or 5 enter and I couldn't do the full shield, right? Like it
Right.
was just like, yeah, man, like in those scenarios, Madoka clap or disrespect would have been able to make me get to turn 5. So even though I can stop 3 damage with those L rigs, the number of enter, which is 3 and 6, is still just awkward.
Yeah, the modularity of Lion and Madoka is just makes them so incredibly powerful, because being able to convert, 2 cards in your hand and 2 enter to just 2 stops instead of needing to throw down for the full 5 enter or something like that is just absolutely game changing. Um, the fact that Deus and Machina, it's all or nothing on those. It makes it way more limiting and extremely predictable for the opponent when they're running into you.
Right, right, and I mean, not to mention we're in a bit of a format where enter burn is going to exist from here on out. Although I will say that the enter burn can be balanced out by just running the Xenocluster in the side.
Xenocluster's a good card.
It's very much a good card, and it's funny to me that it's still like 50-50, right? Like some people really don't want to run it, some people really do want to run it, right? I think people love having action in their Elrig deck, and it's like, yeah, sometimes you might want to concede the fact that you need to survive, though. I feel like if I'm playing a Madoka Clap deck or a MC Line Disrespect deck, I'm more liable to run the Xenocluster, just because I'm like, I gotta make sure I have access to that 5 enter.
Right. I feel like by the time people are done enter burning, it a lot of the time, you're not left with just like 1 enter, and having 2 enter and being able to bump that up to 5 with the Xeno cluster really is just like a little magic number there.
Yeah, and I mean, most of the time, I think also this is just me as a DMX player speaking, but a lot of the times I will enter burn. I'll either do one of two things. One, I'll enter burn early on in the beginning to try to bait out a Xenocluster, and if it doesn't come, I might actually pull back on the burning, so that way you just have a dead Xenocluster in your hand. Um, but I'll try to engineer most cases a situation with, and this is how I actually got all my wins from the ceremony, um, was against MC Disrespect. I I engineered a scenario where they either had 1 enter in their enter zone, or they had 4 enter in their enter zone. I was It was like never a moment that I was like, let me leave them at 2 enter, and I'll burn them down to 2 so they can Xenocluster up to 5, right? Like it was always a situation where I was like, all right, I'm just gonna make sure they're 1 off, because I'm not I'm not playing X to wreck the people's enter. Like that's not my primary goal. My primary goal is to win the game. Um, and so ended up in scenarios where if they had the Xenocluster and they still were going to Xenocluster for 1, it probably would have gotten them there. But yeah, that's just an aside. So I think, yeah, you're right. We do need to be running MC Lion Disrespect or Madoka Clap in order to engineer ourselves to get to a turn 5. Um, while we're talking about the turn numbers, right, turn 4 and turn 5, do you think it's still possible to win on turn 3?
I've seen it happen. But I mean, I just don't think there's enough early damage that you pretty much have to not hit life bursts. Like, the game has to go perfect. The opponent can't have servants, like, or you have to be playing something that's incredibly hyper aggressive. There, maybe something we pull out like a card jockey or something like that and really just blow them away. But I don't think there's a lot of decks at this point that have the capability to push out enough damage and sneak it through to hit turn 3.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Team No Limit still can do it, right? It's weird. The Japanese meta, and at some point I gotta do a podcast on just how the Japanese meta and the American meta have diverged completely at this point. And you can use one to inform yourself on certain stuff, but not 100%. But like X is probably the best deck in the format, but not by a very large margin, by like a percent or two.
I agree with that. I've definitely seen a lot of things that are putting up good fights against it, or being, just very solid decks, but in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, like, so Team No Limit, for example, is still a very viable strat to be doing if you'd rather just be like, yeah, I want to go faster, because X is not actually all that fast. It's not hyper aggressive. It's an aggro deck, but it's not hyper aggressive. It really can't get the turn 3 win. Um, Deus maybe can, because that's a little bit more hyper aggressive. But X doesn't really run Ramels, and I think Ramel is like the signature Signy where if you see it, you're like, oh, this person's going super fast.
It's very true.
Um, but Team No Limit can do the hyper aggression because they have Ray, and Ray allows them to basically just refill their hand when they're just vomiting it out as quickly as possible. And having backup with white instead of black means that they have access to bounce, which is very limited, right? Bounce is one of those things where you basically go, I'm going to bounce this card and I'll win this turn so it won't matter that it's in your hand and that you can replay it. But so I think Team No Limit is also a great example of a deck of, just it wins on turn 3, and then if the opponent goes, Madoka Clap, you don't get an attack phase. Cool, we're moving on to turn 4. You might just be like, okay, I think I'm losing now.
Right, for sure.
Um, but Kevin, is there ever a world where we can get at least to turn 6 in Wixoss?
Turn 6, I would say so, but again, I think it's the similar situations, kind of like what you were talking about, where you've really got to have like good board positioning and a little luck on your side to push that far.
I think there might be a single deck in the format right now that is a turn 6 deck, and I think that deck is Tamago.
Yep, that
And
makes a lot of sense. Yep.
here's my reasoning. Um, I found consistently with Tamago when I played, and what I've been playing is a modified version of what won in the ceremony. I think got 6th or 8th place, or sorry, 8th or 7th place in the ceremony. I think maybe 8th. I've been playing a modified version of that, and I basically just built it a little bit more to strike theory. So it has a little bit more clock on it than the other one did, a little less freeze stuff. And what I found was that I could draw. This is an insane number, Kevin. I could draw about 30 cards in the game. And like to the point where like playing a Phalaris and attacking me is a very valid means of getting rid of one of my life cloth. But the interesting thing is when you're drawing 30 cards, you need less main deck cards that are lane openers in order to win the game, because you draw them. So it was sort of an interesting thing on that. But the funny thing was I was noticing I would regularly have 3 or 4 guards per game. When you're just turboing through your deck that consistently, you pretty much are almost always guaranteed to, unless like one maybe is in your life cloth, right? You're pretty much always guaranteed to have three guards. And another deck that I was able to sort of churn that much through and have that many guards as well was Madoka 2.0 in the tempo version, which I don't think is as great anymore. I think if you're going to play Madoka 2.0, you should play more aggressively. But I think that is another factor that could extend the game a little bit. I mean, having guards, especially early on in the game, can change that number.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think a lot of blue decks in particular really do excel at having a lot of that card filtering. Like, we can talk all day about just like Haket as a card, being able to top check three and really dig for those servants. And you're right, the more servants you have, the longer you can drag the game out, because that Elrig damage is something that's always going to bypass your actual field, the position you have there. And it's something you have to plan for, because the Elrig is putting the game on a clock. That one damage every single turn, doesn't matter how your field is set up, it is going to happen. And if you're seeing 3-4 servants in a game, that's 3-4 turns of that guaranteed damage negated.
Yeah, I mean, like it is saying something in the new set that's coming out, Curiosity Diva, on October 7th. We're going to have access now to a card called Machina Garden. Was it Machina Guardian Dragon?
Yep.
Uh, which I think the community just basically shorthands for with MGD. Which for the cost of 3 cards in your hand, which is a cost, you can negate an Elrig's attack for the turn, right? And if that's Card Jockey, for example, you can negate all 3 of that Elrig's attack. Or if that's Team No Limit, you can negate the Double Crush turn. All very valid things, by the way. But it's interesting, right? That a lot of these just a hair slower decks like Tamago run this card, or even Deus midrange, run this card as just a way to be like, it's just a slight more way to get myself to turn 6, just to live just a little bit longer. And there's actually a pretty huge benefit to getting to turn, even just to turn 5, right? And the big benefit isn't necessarily, oh, I survived to turn 5, which means I can do more stuff. The big benefit is you just gained 4 more attacks. I know it's weird to be like, oh yeah, you played defensive so you can be more aggressive. But that's really the payoff for it, right?
Very much so. And on top of that too, I think if a lot of decks are planning on winning on turn 4, I think a lot of decks sort of run out of gas beyond that. If you're playing aggressive with DXM and you're burning out your souls and your pieces and things like that, you can hit turn 5 and you're sort of running on empty. And if the game pushes beyond that, you don't have a way to close things out super easily.
It's true. I mean, there's been scenarios where like, and we talked about this in our testing. Like, Devil Stinger has just gone so high in like card order of things. Like Devil Stinger when it first came out, I was like, yeah, it's whatever. You discard 3, you draw 3. Who gives a crap? It doesn't do damage. Now I'm like, oh my god, Devil Stinger finds guards every time. It's like I chain Devil Stingers together where I play a Devil Stinger. All right, discard 3, bring back, get a Devil Stinger, chain another Devil Stinger. I found the thing. Sacrifice both Devil Stingers, either go for the win or now I have a guard for next turn. And it's like it's you're right, where it's just like just surviving an extra turn so you can get in a little bit more damage is so good. And often one of the things that DXM does is it starts throwing out souls nilly-willy, just because it's like, oh god, I don't have the win this turn. I have to find a guard so that way I can guarantee between the guard and the Deus, I can survive to the next turn and try to get the win again. And then they might get to the next turn and they go, I don't have souls anymore. I used it all to find a guard. So you're right. Yeah, that's a definite thing. And just the 4 extra attacks are pretty huge. And one of them, generally speaking, is unblockable. And if it's turn 5, the most that your opponent usually gets is 3 guards, which means that that's a second damage almost guaranteed no matter what, because of the second Elrig attack that's going to be able to get through.
The longer the game goes on, obviously, the less chance you're going to have of having a guard in hand, unless you're hitting guard bursts or you have something in your Elrig deck or something that's recurring one. But most decks aren't pulling guards back from the discard pile with stuff that they natively have in their deck.
Yeah, and that's one of the OG things about Diagram, and I think Diagram never really got the center of attention that it deserved in set 1 and even a little bit of set 2, because it did this wonderful. It was ahead of its time, and Dussel was sort of the one pushing for this. It just did the thing, which was I have a clock, I have a good board positioning, and I get an extra guard, right? Like that was the thing, is Musica's ability got a guard back 90% of the time. And so it was one of the first decks to really be like, no, I don't play 2 guards per game. I play 3.
And that really can make the difference. Just that little bit of a guaranteed defense and, the card in hand can really, that's all you might need to push into the extra turn.
Yeah, you do not lose the game at 0 life cloth. That's the thing. You can still win the game at 0 life cloth, and the difference between 0 and being dead is a hair thin, and a guard is half the time the difference.
And,
So
even looking at where Diagram was at that point, people weren't playing Dream Team decks. That deck had access to
Madoka
Madoka.
Clap.
Exactly. So having, even if you're sitting at 0 life cloth with the ability to do a full Madoka Clap and having the guard in hand, that's a whole turn you just survived, guaranteed.
It was pretty good. And speaking of that, right? What there I have a theory that, and I want to run it past you. There is a way in the future of Wecross that we could get to turn 8. But it's a little rules weird, right? So we are allowed to have certain amount of cards in our Elrig deck. But the rules I don't think necessarily state, and neat, if you're listening, please correct me if I'm wrong. The rules don't necessarily state they have to be, 3 assist cards, 3 other assist cards, 4 centers, 2 pieces. I think it's just your Elrig deck can be up to this amount of cards, and you can kind of play with those numbers. Now, you'd be an idiot to be like, I'm going to run an assist line with only 1 stops or something, Like, it's not optimal in the slightest. But if they were to introduce something else that could go into the Elrig deck, then that would change things a little bit. And I think one of the things that they could do to change it would be if they made assist lines that could go up to level 3, right? Then
Right.
you might have something like, just give me a level 3 version of a Madoka Clap, right? And then suddenly I can be like, all right, well, that's an extra turn that I can add on. I'm literally shutting down their attack step.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, the assist lines, looking at them as a whole, get stronger the higher you walk up the line. And if they were to do something, whether that's extending the size of the Elrig deck or just adding some possibilities where, like, okay, this Elrig assist will stay at 1, but this other one will go to 3 or something like that, we might see stronger abilities that could push the game longer.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking would make the major difference, right? As much as things like Exia are a step in a direction of extending the game, they're just main deck cards. That's that's the end qualm with them. They're just the main deck cards, and they don't. There's just not enough of them to make it right. You could add more guards, and I don't know if I love the idea of adding more guards into the game. Though apparently there are decks in the Eternal formats that have like a bajillion guards.
Yeah, there's a bajillion different ones in the Eternal formats, and there's ones with burst, one without burst, if I remember right. Like you could just have a pile of cards sitting there, and now you're not going to win the game if you're running 40 guards, but like you could do it.
Right. And that's another way that you could definitely do it. But it's just ends up being a scenario where I think like basically for every clap you have, you might want to be able to extend the turn like an extra or extend the turn limit by an extra turn. But that's not to say, right, that you could just be like, oh wait, I've figured out the system. If they're telling me that I can run MC Lion Disrespect and Madoka Clap, then I can extend the turn. I'll just run both of them, and then I'll extend the turn by an extra turn. I've cracked the meta. I don't think anyone has the enter for that.
The enter and the lack of offensive power, because when you're looking at your other assist, a lot of the times it's pushing. It's obviously you'll usually run something defensive that's stopping like one attack or something, but it also usually opens up a hole on the board, and that can be really key to pushing some damage.
Yeah, and you're not. That's I think the major thing that I was considering too, but I didn't say it, and you got it right off the bat, which is you just lose offensive pressure by becoming completely defensive. That's one of the things that Tomago was able to at least do, right? We're talking about the OG Tamago 1.0 because it had a very expensive Nova, and Nova opened the lane. So it was offensive, defensive, a little bit of both, but at least it was able to open up some lanes. Um, and like, if you end up going completely, there was at one point where I was trying to see if I could break the meta, and I was playing, and I was trying to see if I could just destroy No Limit. And I played Bang, and I made a dream team, which inevitably I called the meme team because it ran both clap and disrespect. Um, and I could successfully every time get to turn like 8 and then just lose. They just did not have the offensive pressure in the slightest.
Just
And that's
losing in slow motion at that point.
yeah. And that's where you see people playing things like um the Akino, right? Level 2. It's defensive. It's probably the most defensive Elrig you can get that still also has the option of opening up a lane. And then you also see people like a ton of people playing Machina, and that's because Machina's got an ability that costs literally a single enter to be defensive, but also open up a lane. And to the point where even people are playing things like we saw in the ceremony, people are playing things like Ange, level 2, the one that costs 2 enter to bounce any Signy on the board, and then has another ability where you can pay a black and bring a black Signy back to your hand, but he wasn't even able to use that because he wasn't playing any black in his deck. So yeah, and Stomp is the other one, right? And that was the one that you played a lot when you were playing with Ray in Ceremony 2.
Yes, correct. I think that's what it was called. But yeah, just the one cost removal,
Yep.
one cost stop and open a lane on the board.
Yeah, because you just can't. Like you just simply cannot run a full defensive Elrig thing and expect to have enough removal to win your games. It's just not possible, right? Like your Elrig deck, if you guys were to go back and look at Strike Theory, your Elrig deck is the cards that you're guaranteed to have every game, and you need some amount of offense in that in order to pull off the win. So yeah, I don't think that you can. That's why I said like a level 3 assist could maybe extend the game, because just on the turn orders and the amount of enter that you have and the amount of pressure that you need to put, like it just doesn't feasibly line up to run both of these defensive Elrigs. I think you run one and not the other. You
Right.
run something that opens up a lane.
And you kind of alluded to it a little bit too. The enter cost is enormous as well. Like, even if you could somehow afford the full stop back to back with both level 2 assists, what are you using to close out the rest of the game? You've got nothing left. That's so much
Right.
enter.
Right. Like, that's the whole point when I was like, Bang could do it because Bang can give Lancer for free. But it didn't end up working because it was like, all right, my offense was then at that point limited to 2 a turn, and 2 a turn you have to win on turn like 8 or 9. It just doesn't work. The method is not there to support it. So yeah, I basically gave up my 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 journey on trying to make Nova work again in this format. I just basically was like, nah, it just does not. There's no feasible way to get to this turn 8, turn 9. You just got to try to win on turn 5, and in some extreme circumstances, turn 6. So that's it. Hey, speaking of these turn 4, turn 3, turn 5 decks. We talked about it briefly with the turn 3 decks. We think that Card Jockey can do it still, and we think that No Limit can do it still. What do you think are the best decks for turn 4, and what do you think are the best decks for turn 5?
I'd say for turn 4 right now, definitely more of your traditional, like your idea of what aggressive would be right now. I think, the key shining example that we discussed a little bit at the beginning is X. X has the ability to hit level 3, hit level 4, and put boards down on the field that are, first off, burning enter, that can deny the opponent's assists or optimal usage of their assists. And also, they have their souls essentially free. There's some free removal in there. You've got X's once per game that can essentially put 2 damage on the board right there with Assassin. It's very easy, I think, for X to shoot for turn 4. Trying to think if there's any other aggressive decks in that same line. I think maybe like the Hirina build that's going around right now might be a good turn 4, turn 5 deck as well.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Turn 5 for me, the first thing I think of is so you mentioned the blue style decks are pushing a bit later in the game with some defenses, whether that's Madoka, Tamago, even going into turn 6 that way. Um, the other big one for me at turn 5, I think, is Deus a lot of the time. Being able to pull back sort of that perfect board with your once per game and setting something up that can either be as offensive or defensive as you want with whatever deck style you're building with Deus can allow you to push that extra turn at the end of the game when cards are running low, resources are running low. You can just for free essentially pull back your perfect board, put it down, and that might be able to buy you some time there as well.
Yeah, and I think Deus does a pretty good turn 4 deck when it's played in team. Like it actually plays as a little bit more of an aggressive X, right? It basically gives up the enter burning for just more removal. So
Right.
it ends up being a bit more aggro centered. But the Deus mid range deck, and I think there's a lot of nebulous builds floating. Like that's the thing, is like Deus is just such a stupidly good Elrig that does everything that you could ever want in an Elrig, basically. That it allows you to be nebulous with it and truly just do whatever you want with it. Because again, you'd be like, all right, do I want a combo? Yep, here it is. I can bring it all back and put it all together. Or you can be like, do I want to do aggro? Yep, I can bring in these lane openers. Okay, do I want to do like Exia and stall out a little bit more? Yep, here it is. Bring it all back. I got it. But I think probably the best Deus build for now, right? Atomic Deus is just literally around the corner. Is probably this white assists where you can run white heaven to give yourself just that clock you need. And the white assists are a little bit more defensive. And then you just rely on black's removal and you start trying to smack them down to be a turn 5 win. I think you can do that pretty easily with a Deus white build.
And also something, we talked about a little bit ago too. White black gives you access to Super Halesta Saber, which is extremely cost efficient and pulls back a servant, which is like one of the only things Deus can't natively do. And just, the extra servant is again pushing the game forward a little bit there.
Well, the funny thing with Super Celestia Saber was, the most play I used for that piece was way back when I was like, we could still make Toko work, right? Like I was in set 2 and being like, we could still make Toko work. And for what it's worth, we could. It wasn't a great deck, but it was okay. But in this set that just came out in the DXM deck, there is a perfect pull order from Super Celestia Saber now, and it is fantastic, right? Your white card, you pull X. All right, cool. You know you're going to live to next turn because you're going to limit how much damage is going to be done to you now. Your colorless card, you pull back a guard. All right, you've even shored up your defense a little bit more at 2 enter. Cool. What do you pull back with the black? Anything that is removal. Like then you got board presence and you've got a way to deal damage. All for 2 enter. You basically have accomplished that. So yeah, Super Celestia Saber is super fantastic, but it was always lacking the exact cards that you want to pull back, right? There just wasn't the correct cards to pull back. Now with Xia existing, yeah, you can. There is a very very valid order of things to pull back.
I think on top of that too, a lot of decks rely on their pieces for offensive power. And the thing with Deus is that her offensive power is just baked right into her souls that she just
Right.
has by default. So you can sacrifice one of those piece slots there and still have the potential to do a full board nuke if you play out all of your souls.
Yeah. I mean, the funniest thing about that is with Super Celestia Saber, since the black is the one that's getting you the board presence anyways, like right, like that's gonna get you the lane opener. You're not really sacrificing. What you're sacrificing is enter efficiency, right? Because you got to pay for the two to get something that you probably need to pay one or two of in order to open the lane.
Right. That's very true. That's very true. Or
But
hey,
it
you can even pull Phalaris and threaten their deck and life cloth that way too, if you really want.
Look, Polaris is a real card now. All right, it's not like every deck doesn't go to like it's like sometimes you're playing not even card jockey, you're playing no limit, and you're like you saw Polaris and you're like that's fine, I have like 25 cards in my deck, this doesn't make any difference, right? But you play card jockey and you're like, oh, actually this makes a huge amount of difference because I really only have 3 cards left in my deck or something, right? And then you're playing like X even, and they've deist early, all right, deist shield, and then you're looking, you're like, how many do you have in there? 7. You go, yeah, this isn't gonna work.
Yeah, Dave's Shield burning cards. I mean, Black getting access to Baphomet and burning the cards there early again as well. Like
Yeah,
you've got to move through a lot of cards in the deck. I mean, people are playing Death Deck now too, and they want cards in the discard pile and popping minus 10 cards from your deck on a deck that wants to use Death Deck. That just might be deck out and
right,
instant damage.
right, and Devil Singer, right? Like red is more than ever now burning through its own cards to try to find its tools. So yeah, it's a super valid strat. You're right. That lane opener might just be a Phalaris, and you're right. Maybe it's just super enter efficient, and I didn't recognize it immediately. Yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
Kevin, I
it
think
really just goes back to Dave's being a super flexible deck.
yeah,
The,
yeah,
the amount of options you can really pick there are just insane.
yeah, and it's like funny that it's able to. And speaking of, we can just speak on Deus a little bit longer. It's funny
Sorry.
how Deus is able to just like do everything, right? Like it's like, do you want like there's a world where once it has maybe the assists or something that it can full on be a control deck. Yeah, it can be a control deck. It can be a combo deck because it'll pull your combo back. It can be a mid range deck because it can pull back just any random good junk that's good for positioning. And you'd think, well, maybe it can't really be an aggro deck because I mean, how important is it to pull back specific cards for an aggro deck? And the answer is it's pretty good. It's not amazing. It's pretty good, but and this is the big one. It's got Trigger of Victory access too. So the answer is yeah. No, actually, it's a fantastic aggro deck.
Yeah, it really is the Elrig that kind of does it all right now, and there's a reason. All eyes are kind of on that deck going forward. There's just a lot of possibility on what Japan has already built with it, and what we might build with it as well going forward. Because you did say that our meta has very much diverged, and it might continue diverging in the future.
It's true. I mean, when everyone was like, Kirana's the best deck, period, right? There was a lot of two things. One, Diagram, which did a good job at stopping and controlling Hirana No Limit, and two, there was way more card jockey than there's ever been in like Japan. Like they were just like, that's fine. I'll instead have life bursts that put things out and block, and I'll also just win on turn 3 because I'll just out aggro the aggro deck with my combo. So yeah, I that's the thing is, and like and the big eye opener was I really went into that last ceremony with like a lot of testing, like too much testing. I ended up I didn't get COVID, but I was exposed to COVID, and I had to isolate for like 8 days. And I was just like, I will play nothing but Wixoss in here because I have nothing else I can do. So it let me play literally hundreds of games. And what ended up happening was I was finding out, yeah, X is the best deck, but it's only the best deck by like 2%, and it has counters. So it's really not as cut and dry as people make it out to seem. And so even though I'm excited for Atomic, I don't. I'm going in wary, being like, I don't know if it's going to be actually like game breaking good, like everyone thinks it's going to be.
Time will definitely tell. There are a lot of extremely creative players in this sphere, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what kind of decks people are going to be brewing in order to fight. What people are expecting to be the king of the format going forward.
Yeah. Except it's Wecross, so it's definitely the queen of the format, right?
Very true. Very true.
Well, Kevin, I think everyone knows more about the pace of the game, and it's a topic that I've been like just super passionate about for the last couple days. It's really last couple weeks, honestly. It's really affected my deck building. So thanks for coming and talking about it. And do you want to do our sign off?
Great. Yeah, sure. All right, everybody. It was nice talking to you all. Thank you for having me on, and may you always flip a life burst.
All right, Kevin, and just stay tuned, viewers. We will be putting out more content with Kevin in the future, and doing more cool videos. So we'll see you all later.